Did you know Montel uses artificial intelligence and machine learning to forecast spot prices, inflow to reservoirs, wind and run-of-river production? We can improve forecast for your individual power plants anywhere in Europe. Contact us at ai@montelnews.com for more info.
Hello listeners and welcome to the Montel Weekly Podcast, bringing you energy matters in an informal setting. This week we return to the gas market. UK and continental European gas prices surged to record highs in recent weeks, triggering an energy crisis across Europe. Industry, ministers and consumer groups have all called for intervention in a market some have labelled broken or not fit for purpose. To talk us through current market dynamics, the main price drivers and the outlook for the coming weeks is our old friend Wayne Bryan of Refinitiv. Hi Wayne, welcome back to the pod. How are you doing?
Good morning, Richard. Yes, I'm very well, thank you. It's nice to be back. And actually nice to be back here live.
Absolutely, we're recording live in London. Exactly.
Exactly. So no, I'm very well, thank you.
So Wayne, talk us through current price dynamics. This week, we're recording on Thursday. We've seen prices surge to unbelievable levels and then come off basically on the back of some noises from Russia. What's happening?
Yeah, well, it's been a wild few weeks, let alone week. And yesterday's downside was shocking to say the least in terms of the speed of it. And of course, we saw Putin with his nice comments about additional gas supply to Northwest Europe this winter once the domestic situation has been sorted out in terms of refilling their domestic storages. Now, he did say that they will exceed their quota through Ukraine, but he did say it is more expensive for them. I think it works out additional sort of 3 billion on an annualized basis, what it would cost them to pump additional gas to Ukraine. He did mention the ESP as well, so there'll be some volumes that can go through there.
The ESP being what?
The actual index, the ESP, electronic sales platform. They've been pushing the delivery through that for a while now. I don't think we've seen anything since August this year, but he did signal that as well. And also, he just had a generally, a nice tone about we're here to help Northwest Europe solve their gas shortage problems. And of course, me obviously being a trader before, I think what you've seen here is a classic case of buy the rumor. There's no concrete bookings of any additional volume yet, as far as I'm concerned, unless you've seen something I haven't. So again, it's a classic case of buy the rumor. And the price did rise quite steeply in the previous session. And again, more comments from Gazprom, this time from, I think, the head of one of their exports. And he was talking about there's ashberries on the trees, which means it's going to be a cold winter in Russia. So we're going to, again, prioritize domestic over exports. And that was the day before. So you can just see what's happened in the last couple of days. For me, it's unbelievable. To see the NBP over 400 pence a therm and then trade back where it did was quite startling. And I feel sorry for a lot of those traders out there, especially if you've got short positions, etc., because this volatility is not normal. And these large one-day price swings are really having a detrimental effect on that side of the market. But yeah, until we see something booked, for me, there's nothing's changed. But there is that rumor. And of course, we all get taught by the rumor, sell the fact. So let's just see what happens over the coming weeks. The next auctions should be pretty key as well. So very interesting, the effect on these markets.
Absolutely. As you said, this is nothing really new. Gazprom has said this, that there will be flows this year. There will be additional capacity. So really, it's astonishing that the prices have come off that dramatically just on the basis of some noises from Putin and other Russian politicians. Maybe this shows just how nervous the market is.
Exactly. It highlights nervousness. It highlights, all it took was a few words and we see prices, come off dramatically in the space of a day. And even as I'm looking this morning, we're down another, Q1's down, front month's down, day ahead. They're all falling. I think we're down about 8-9% this morning on the near curve out until Q1. I think even the summer's down 7% today. So it just re-emphasizes how short this market is, how nervous this market is, and highlights the uncertainty that we have moving forward throughout this winter. And we're only, tomorrow means winter's been open a week. It's early days, and we saw the effect of the colder weather forecast the other day as well on prices. So again, this is going to be a continuing theme We said that, we've been saying that now for weeks and months, that expect volatility to continue. And volatility, if you look at it as a measurement of close to close, has been at levels we've never seen before. And again, it just highlights market nervousness.
But this kind of volatility, prices up 5, 10, 12%. I mean, have we seen this before?
No, not to this level.
No.
And I was looking at this for our winter outlook we did recently about average price movement, and it's up over 20-fold in terms of looking at the day-to-day on the MBP and the TTF. Where we used to price volatility, but I mean, we've been seeing 50 pence here, 20 euros here, sort of movements we're really, really not used to whatsoever. And it's just, it's making the news. And that's one thing I always say. I've never had so many requests. And I've never had so many requests from people to speak about this because you turn on the TV, it's on the front page. I mean, yesterday they were on the news, they were talking again about gas prices was the main headline, talking about Putin. I see Putin's face all over the news today. But he was always going to have an impact on this market. And I think we've spoke about it before. And I think even in previous times I spoke to you guys, the effect he has on just a few words. Like Donald Trump on the crude market and global markets in the past, this has shown the influence Putin has. But I think it was his openness and his willingness to sort of be conciliatory and offer these additional volumes to Europe. Very nice of him.
Very kind man.
Very kind.
So we're quite lucky to have you on board here, Wayne. You must be, much sought after, your opinions on what's happening and your explanation. So, you mentioned 400 pence per therm on the MBP, the UK gas hub. On the TTF, we've seen prices close to 200 euros a megawatt hour. What drove them that high?
Again, it's just these concerns. And I think they're exacerbated this week by what we saw in terms of a downside revision in temperatures, especially in Germany. And I think with that colder weather, again, we want to be injecting, but we're still going to be withdrawing throughout this winter. And there is, if you look at some different potential scenarios, a beast from the east scenario in tandem with a lack of LNG due to steep Asian prices would result in this, so we're going to run out of gas, of course, because that's a bit too much scaremongering, but we're going to drain these storages even more. And I think the concern is if we end up below last year's levels when we get to the end of the winter season, it's like we're kicking the can down the road and we're going to face these same problems again. Maybe not as strong next summer because we won't have the extensive maintenance that knocked out a lot of UK and Norwegian production last summer, which also was a fundamental factor into why we entered the winter with storages at such levels.
What's happening here with Gazprom and Russia? Is this geopolitics? Is it Gazprom saying, look, if you don't approve Nord Stream 2, look what happens to your prices. Look what's happens to your energy. You're in a crisis. And it's because you haven't approved Nord Stream 2. Is that what's happening? Or is it, does Russia have overcapacity? Can it supply more?
Russia it's impacting prices. We all knew that. And we said that, in our webinar a few weeks ago about the sentiment around Nord Stream 2 or additional supplies from Russia into Northwest Europe or into Europe in general. And milder weather is two of the only factors that can push this market down or make it a bit more comfortable. So in terms of Russia, number one, they're satisfying all their contractual obligations. They've delivered as they said they would to all their clients. Number two, one of the reasons, again, we talk about Nord Stream 2, and of course they want it up and running. They've got the transit contract with Ukraine that expires in 2024, and obviously it seems like they won't want to be extending that at all. And now that probably has a political aspect to it, which I don't like to get involved in these political issues, but you can tell from the outside that, with what's happening with Ukraine and Russia, they're going to be averse to, sending more gas through that. And by not buying post-2024, it proves that. And also as well, if you look at their own domestic problems, they've had, I think they entered the start of summer with their domestic storages down a good 20% against where they were the year before. So they have a priority to prioritize their domestic market. I think they have to refill their storages by November the 1st. And it was always been thought of that once that happened, we could see some additional gas coming into Northwest Europe. Also, as well, in terms of production, we don't get all the data, of course. I think it comes mainly monthly, but we know that Russian production has had its issues this summer with the fire at the condensate plant. We've also seen them producing close to capacity. So do they even have that additional capacity to produce more gas and send it to Europe? We did see the talk the other day talking about Novatek. Perhaps they could put 10 BCM into the market. Again, something that Putin had identified. I'm not too sure Gazprom were too keen on it. But again, there is the potential for additional gas into Northwest Europe. As Putin said yesterday, we might push it by the ESP. or we're going to increase our flows via Ukraine, or they can buy more on the month ahead auction. So they've got options, but I don't think it's right to blame Gazprom. They advised the market what they were going to deliver. They're delivering that, all their customers. But what you will see is, if you look at Northwest European storage inventories, now, if you look at them as a whole, you see they're at these, multi-year lows. Now, if you separate that and take away what we know Gazprom has in its store capacity, Hydac, Riden, etc. If you look at that chart of just Gazprom-controlled storages, they're significantly below where they normally are this time of year. Now, that was a case of earlier in the year, Gazprom was satisfying their contractual obligations through Northwest European storage. Now, if you then take a step back, look at the Northwest European storage inventory without the Gazprom storages, or where they hold storage, you can see we're around 2018 levels. We're not as bad as we thought. So you can point the finger at them, but not in a direct way. It's their strategy and their way forward to use their domestic storage, to use their European storages to satisfy long-term contracts. And that's what we've seen. And that kind of explains the shortfall. And I think there is some, watch what I say here, there is some sort of pressure in a sort of underhand way that is, look, you need this gas. We've seen what's happening now with inflation. Let us get access to Nord Stream 2 quicker than the 6 months, because we all know now it's 4 months from the German regulator, and then the EU have 2 months themselves. So it could be 6 months. All the paperwork was in, I think, on September the 9th. So I've always said, and I said this in our webinar as well, in some reports, that I believe that we might see a speeding up of the certification process in order to ease the pressure on gas markets. That doesn't look quite as needed now in light of yesterday's comments, but it still could be a possibility. But then you have the unbundling rules as well. We know that AG have complained against the original decision that would allow third-party access to the pipeline. So you've still got that as well rumbling on in the background. We didn't foresee any Nord Stream 2 volumes potentially until Q1. We looked at a few scenarios where we factor it in Q1, but we didn't expect any flows via Nord Stream 2 this quarter, or by the end of 2021. So, yeah, Russia's playing, a huge part in this. Let's not shy away from the truth. They're centric to all what's going on, but when people start attributing blame to them, that's when I think it's a bit too easy, I think, to blame Russia.
And as you said earlier, the ashberries are on the trees in Russia, so they're expecting a very cold winter as well. On top of that, so
and if you look at the forecast for Ukraine and Russia moving forward, it looks a bit colder than normal. So that again, who can blame them for satisfying their own domestic market and making sure they've got security of storage for their own people? I mean, I don't see anything wrong with that personally, but hopefully they get filled soon as possible. So then we might see some additional gas into Northwest Europe, or as Putin said yesterday, via various means. So again, it's all to be seen. Like we said at the top of the show, nothing's changed. Nothing. I've seen no agreements of additional capacity, but we do know that now there's rumours of it. The market has listened to these rumours, and the effect is quite apparent on yesterday's prices.
And the way prices tumbled and how quickly and how they've accelerated down, has that taken you by surprise, Wayne, or is that something you expected?
Well, I wouldn't say the number. Yesterday was quite an extraordinary day if you look at the chart. I mean,
yesterday being Wednesday.
Yesterday's Wednesday when we saw this. Dutch futures went up 40%, and then they ended up down at the end of the day. That's not normal. As much as we've seen these big swings throughout this summer, we've not seen a swing like that. I mean, I was just in awe to see, UK front month at over £4 or, 400 pence per therm. It's just, but front month TTF did say on Monday, I could see €100 being hit. I didn't imagine it would hit about 160 to be honest. So I think it's come back, obviously, as we know, yesterday and today on Thursday morning. It's coming down a bit. So, but it just, it highlights the nervousness and about this market. And as we all say the same thing about how tight it is and the various reasons why. If you look at the JKM, that shot up as well. I mean, Asia don't want to get caught short like last winter. We all remember what happened last winter, where we had a plethora of events and outages, supply concerns, charter rates, etc. Northwest Europe got hardly any LNG in winter last year compared to the previous winter, when we were. Again, we balance the market, whether it's in terms of dumping unwanted volumes, or we can, help balance the market now. So it's always the case. We are Northwest Europe is the balancing region for global gas, really. And we've seen that in the last 2 years, if you look from 19 to 21, there's been huge differences from oversupply. Now we've lurched straight into undersupply. So yeah, we are far too reliant, I think, on LNG. And you can see that in some of the price movements and concerns for this winter.
What are your expectations for the coming weeks, Wayne? I mean, do you expect to see the volatility to continue? We'll have 40% up and 50% down, or what do you think?
I think that 40, 50% could happen again, but I'll be loath to say it wouldn't move as much as that. We're seeing some demand side response now with, big fertilizer companies, obviously in the UK, they're back online, but we can still see a fall in industrial production. If you look yesterday, as the last few days, there's been news breaking of large producers of whether it be zinc or other manufacturers saying, hey, these prices for us, it's unprofitable. We can we'll stop production because it's not. I saw a Hungarian company yesterday said the same. Every €1 increase adds a quadruple increase on their actual costs. People are also passing these costs down to end users, which is also helping this energy inflation that the whole of the European Union seems to be worried about and talking about a lot more. So I think the sort of 40, 50%, it can happen again, but I think we'll move back to sort of where we were before these last few days, 10, 15, 20% swings maybe. But again, it depends on what news is coming. We had this news about the weather. We saw the effect on prices on a bullish front. We had this news from Russia. We saw the effect on a bearish front. So it just takes something. Well, imagine Forty's pipeline went down tomorrow. These things are there. They can happen, They can happen like we've seen. We saw Hammerfest go down. I think that's not back on until next year as well. So these things can happen. If we get anything unplanned outage-wise, we saw the IFA interconnector, maybe some more French strikes, anything like that tightens this market can have a sort of exacerbate the effect on price movement. So I think the 40, 50% like we saw yesterday, I'll be amazed if we see that again. Amazed is probably too far of a word, but I'll be surprised if we see such a move in intraday like we saw yesterday. That an extraordinary set of circumstances saw that happen. We had talk of some short positions being closed due to exposure. We had the Putin situation. So we had a few events yesterday that sort of fed into this extreme price movement that I don't think we could see that again, but you might have some comments that come out next week. We won't be supplying additional gas due to. We'll retrace those gains or those losses quite quickly, I'd imagine.
Yeah. And Asia's obviously crucial here. You mentioned Asia. What are your forecasts for demand there? I mean, we saw prices rise up to $55 per MMBTU in the Japan, Korea, Northeast Asian market. What do you think here, Wayne? How much of a drive is that going to be in the coming quarter?
Yeah, huge, because we look at, if we're talking about LNG, we only expect about another 2 BCM into Northwest Europe on top of what we saw last year, which is quite meager. And again, it's been the huge growth in China that caught everyone by surprise last year. Latin America as well, seen the droughts there. Brazil has taken away a lot of LNG cargoes that should have come into Northwest Europe. So what we see there is Chinese demand is going to be key. I think if you look at what's happening there now in terms of Chinese economy, there's a few headwinds at the moment, but you've seen what the government have been saying, or the NDRC, about power shortages. They've ordered a ramp up of production of gas, coal, a ramp up of imports. And again, they don't want a supply crunch. So China's key actually to this. We don't see Chinese growth to be as large as last year. I think last year it grew by at least, I think we had an additional 7 to 8 BCM of Chinese demand. We don't think that will happen again this year, but it depends on the economics of what goes on in China. We think looking at Chinese demand, again, if it falls by 2% or 3%, and then we lose imports by about 1.1 BCM. So it really is uncertain of what's going to happen in China. But we see South and Southeast Asia as well on the rise. You've seen Thailand, Vietnam picking up, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh as well as their demand increases. And we think we see about a 10% increase there. So there is other demand pockets. You've got Japan. They've got they've got 8 reactors online now. So again, we're seeing their output or their actual demand to slow. But again, these nuclears might not come back online. We might have some further problems, which again affects the sort of balance. You've got South Korea. South Korea have numerous emission policies which we're waiting to find out about, which could affect how much LNG they import. So Asia is very important, and again, on the industrial side of it, it's extremely important about what we see going into China this year, and it will have a huge bearing on what comes into Northwest Europe. And if you look at the Asian prices, it tells you that they again don't want to get a repeat of last winter. So what we might see is, as we move into, if we do get a bit of a milder winter and move into sort of Q1, we might see, like last year towards the end of Q1, a ramp up of cargo arrivals into Northwest Europe. But again, the weather is one of the big uncertainties so far, and that also will drive what we see in terms of demand from China.
I mean, everyone wants this gas. It remains to be seen, as you say, how much of it will actually come to Europe, and at what price, what prices need to be to attract that into the European market. But let's talk a little bit about the market dynamics, Wayne, in the sense that, we see backwardation in the market. We see as in prices further out on the curve are far below what they are now for the near term. What kind of impact is that having on traders' books, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good point. And you've seen a lot of people are exposed to this market, especially if you're on the short side, which kind of links into, if you look at the UK suppliers that have gone bust, typically some of these smaller suppliers that have massive exposure short term. Whereas if you look at the big players like your British Gases, etc., they generally hedge their residential consumption or residential books, domestic demand 2-3 years ahead. So these smaller players getting caught short, it just shows you the amount of people are still open. Some people would have had open positions betting on prices to start softening, and having that exposure like we saw, there's going to be a big liquidity problem because the margin call required for some of these open positions, like we saw yesterday, those rumors of a closing of a big position, which helped accelerate some of that movement we saw. So I think the credit risk is rising, and I was speaking to someone within the industry about this last week, and one of the comments they made that now a lot of the suppliers, and I imagine it's the same across Europe now, are raising their credit. So normally to take out a supply contract, there'll be an amount of credit they'll allow you, and them credit now is tightening a lot more because we're seeing companies go out of business and how they're going to pay these bills. So even the suppliers now are starting to, tighten up. And I think that's happening across, whether you're a producer, whether you're a supplier, whether you're an actual trader, whether you have clients to actually buy energy for, or you're just prop trading, which you're seeing a lot more people have come into this market now due to the volatility. It's been exhibiting. We're attracting a lot more of the hedge funds. And again, that helps kind of explain the speed of some of these moves. We see some algos or black boxes because some of these moves have been sort of highly irregular in terms of what we've seen. So, and liquidity, if you look at liquidity and volumes, they're up at record levels, which shows you there's more players in the market. So when we see something like yesterday, it cascades on the downside. But yeah, these prices at these levels have been causing huge concerns when it comes to margin calls and credit risk. And that will continue, and it will knock some players out the market. People have to close these positions now because you can't be exposed anymore.
It's too expensive, absolutely.
Yeah, and it's the same in the power market as well. I mean, power prices are eye-watering, and we're seeing, again, a lot of intervention might be needed. Energy inflation is coming, or it will be here. I've seen the actual predictions of increases on bills across Europe, and it's quite startling, really. So
you're saying some of the volatility we've seen in recent days and weeks is due to sort of hedge funds, perhaps from the US, entering the market and being quite active, as well as black box trading them.
I wouldn't say where they're from the US or not, but we've definitely seen increasing activity. And you can look at the ICE volume reports, and that will show you there's a lot more interest at record levels in these contracts, and open interest as well. So there's a lot of people, on either side of the fence here, waiting for outcomes. So when we see these swings, it forces, whether it's compliance buying, you're hitting stop losses on either side. So again, you're being forced to buy more. And again, we are seeing more of these, definitely more influence from people who won't be taking delivery of these of this gas, which only makes it, not to say unfair is the wrong word, but it kind of increases the strain on those that are expecting delivery, those that are, really exposed, like these smaller suppliers, like these big manufacturers who are really, really getting caught up in this.
As you mentioned, you're saying industry is suffering, consumer bills are going to go up. We're seeing the role of speculators in these markets, in a sense. Do you think that will increase the call for some kind of political intervention? We're seeing the noises in certain European countries that, maybe if consumer bills are up because of sort of hedge funds activity, maybe that's not sort of very politically sound. Do you expect any moves?
Well, there's been already rumours of political intervention, but I was reading something, they were talking about having, a regional, let's buy gas for the region. So how would this possibly work? It's noise, and also it highlights, like I think even Putin said it highlights that people did say, that the spot market might not be the best way forward, just putting everything on the spot. longer term contracts do have their benefits. And we've seen that. And again, it was highlighted yesterday by Putin about that. So I think intervention, they're talking about it, but to actually, to go through and actually implement, looking at some of the things they're trying to talk about doing, I don't see it. Maybe in the carbon market, they can release more, permits into the market or help down push that price. But in the gas market, I think it'll be hard, and you can't put caps. How could you put a cap on I saw someone say about a cap on the wholesale price. That's never going to happen. Let's be honest. Defeats the whole object of the market. You put a cap on a wholesale, natural gas market. It defeats the whole point of it. So I think intervention might come by way of, let's facilitate the speeding up of this certification process, and of course the unbundling process as well. That might be some political intervention, but in terms of anything else, I think they're going to find it hard when I look at some of the potential ideas to actually implement these. So,
Wayne, thanks ever so much for joining the Montel Weekly Podcast. Great to have you on board again. So thank you again.
Thank you. You're welcome. Always a pleasure. Have a great day.
So listeners, you can now follow the podcast on our own Twitter account, aptly named the Montel Weekly Podcast. Please direct message any suggestions, questions, or let us know if you think you have a good idea for a guest on the show. You can also send us an email to podcast@montelnews.com. Lastly, remember to keep up to date with all that's happening in energy markets on Montel News. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Thank you and goodbye.